A man's value is rarely judged by what he says about himself. It's perceived through how he moves through the world when no one is asking him to perform. Women don't calculate value logically in real time. They sense it emotionally, through patterns, consistency, and restraint. And most men misunderstand this, because they confuse value with effort, attention, or intention. From a psychological perspective, women assess a man's value through signals of internal stability. How regulated he is under pressure. How he responds when things don't go his way. Whether his identity collapses when approval is uncertain. A man who remains grounded when outcomes are unclear communicates abundance, not necessarily of options, but of self-trust. And self-trust is one of the strongest attraction cues in human behavior. One of the earliest indicators women pick up on is how a man relates to himself. Does he seem comfortable alone? Does he fill silence with nervous explanation? Or does he allow space without tension? Men who rush to impress often believe they're showing interest, but what they're actually signaling is need. And need shifts the power dynamic immediately. Value, in contrast, is felt when a man does not require validation to remain present. Body language plays a significant role here. Slower movements, relaxed posture, calm eye contact. These cues suggest that a man is not internally rushed. He's not chasing emotional outcomes. Women read this as confidence, not loud confidence, but settled confidence. The kind that comes from having faced life and not needing to prove survival. Another critical factor is selectivity. Men who perceive themselves as valuable do not try to be liked by everyone. They respond rather than pursue compulsively. They engage without over-investing. This selectivity signals boundaries, and boundaries create respect. When a man treats his time and attention as meaningful, women intuitively mirror that valuation. Women also observe how a man handles minor friction, disappointment, delay, disagreement. A man who becomes defensive, withdrawn, or reactive under small pressure reveals insecurity. A man who remains emotionally consistent communicates resilience. This is not about suppressing emotion, it's about not being ruled by it. Emotional self-control suggests leadership of the self, which is foundational to perceived value. Importantly, women do not perceive value through promises. They perceive it through patterns. A man who speaks about ambition but lives reactively feels unstable. A man who speaks little but acts consistently feels solid. Over time, consistency outweighs charisma, and reliability becomes more attractive than intensity. There is also a shift that happens when a man stops pedestalizing women. When he relates to them as equals rather than prizes, his behavior relaxes. Compliments feel grounded. Desire feels intentional. Conversation feels mutual. This shift is often felt immediately, even if it can't be articulated. Women feel less evaluated and less responsible for maintaining the man's emotional state. One of the most misunderstood truths is that women are not attracted to a man because he values them highly. They are attracted to a man who values himself appropriately. Overgiving, over-explaining, and over-accommodating do not raise perceived value, they dilute it. Value is felt when a man gives from fullness, not from fear of loss. This is why two men can do the same thing and be perceived completely differently. One texts often and feels clingy. Another texts often and feels warm. The difference is not behavior, it's emotional posture. Need versus choice. Anxiety versus calm. Women sense this distinction intuitively. At the foundation, a man's value is perceived through coherence. Alignment between what he says, what he does, and how he carries himself emotionally. When those elements match, women feel clarity. And clarity creates attraction far more reliably than effort ever could. This is only the surface. In the next part, we'll explore how women assess a man's value over time, through boundaries, emotional containment, and how he responds when interest is uncertain. As time passes, women stop evaluating a man's value through first impressions and start assessing it through consistency. What matters now is not how strong the attraction felt at the beginning, but how stable the man remains as the dynamic unfolds. This is where many men unknowingly lower their perceived value, not by doing something wrong, but by abandoning their center. One of the clearest indicators women track is how a man handles uncertainty. Early on, ambiguity is natural. Schedules shift. Responses vary. Emotional temperature fluctuates. Men who perceive themselves as high value do not chase clarity through pressure. They don't demand reassurance. They don't interrogate interest. They allow uncertainty to exist without letting it destabilize them. That tolerance signals emotional security. Boundaries become more visible at this stage. Does the man say yes to everything? Does he overextend to maintain momentum? Or does he protect his time and energy without explanation or apology? Women read boundaries as self-respect. When a man respects his own limits, it reassures her that he will not lose himself in the relationship, and that she will not be required to manage him emotionally. Another important signal is how a man responds when a woman pulls back slightly. This is not always a test, but it often reveals underlying dynamics. Men who panic, escalate effort, or seek reassurance communicate dependency. Men who remain warm but steady communicate abundance. They do not punish distance, nor do they chase it. They stay consistent, and consistency preserves value. Emotional containment is also assessed continuously. When a man shares, does he do so from clarity or from overwhelm? Women are not repelled by vulnerability, they are repelled by emotional dumping. A man who can articulate his inner world without making it someone else's responsibility maintains respect. Emotional maturity is felt when expression is measured, not explosive. Women also notice how a man handles her emotions, not whether he fixes them, but whether he stays grounded in their presence. Men who become defensive, dismissive, or overwhelmed by female emotions signal fragility. Men who listen without absorption, who validate without collapsing, signal strength. This creates safety, and safety deepens attraction. Another subtle factor is how a man integrates his life outside the relationship. Does he slowly abandon routines, friendships, and personal direction? Or does he remain anchored? Men who dissolve their structure to maintain connection often feel suffocating over time. Men who remain whole feel attractive because the relationship enhances rather than replaces their life. Women also evaluate a man's relationship to effort. Is effort given freely, or is it used as leverage? Men who expect emotional return for effort feel transactional. Men who give without expectation feel grounded. But this only works when effort is balanced with boundaries. Overgiving without discernment lowers value rather than raising it. Over time, women are less influenced by charm and more influenced by pattern recognition. How does this man behave when things are easy, when they are difficult, when nothing is happening at all? A man whose emotional state remains regulated across conditions is perceived as dependable. And dependability becomes increasingly attractive as emotional investment grows. At this stage, value is no longer hypothetical. It is experiential. A woman doesn't wonder if the man is valuable. She feels it in how the relationship flows. Ease replaces tension. Trust replaces evaluation. And attraction stabilizes rather than spikes. Conflict is where a man's perceived value is tested most clearly. Not because disagreement is negative, but because pressure reveals structure. Women do not expect perfection during conflict, they observe regulation. How a man handles tension tells them far more than how he behaves when things are easy. One of the first things women notice is whether a man becomes reactive. Raised voice, defensive explanations, emotional withdrawal, or passive aggression disguised as calm. These reactions signal instability. They suggest that the man's sense of self is tied too closely to being agreed with or understood. High-value men do not need to win arguments to maintain identity. Women also pay attention to whether a man can stay present without dominating. Does he listen to understand, or does he listen to respond? Men who interrupt, explain excessively, or invalidate emotion may believe they are asserting logic, but they are actually signaling insecurity. Calm listening, followed by measured response, communicates confidence and self-control. Another important signal is accountability. High perceived value is reinforced when a man can acknowledge mistakes without collapsing into shame or defensiveness. Owning impact without over-apologizing shows emotional maturity. It communicates that his self-worth is stable enough to tolerate imperfection. Women read this as strength, not weakness. Boundaries during conflict are equally revealing. Does the man hold his ground respectfully, or does he surrender to restore peace? Men who consistently abandon their position to avoid discomfort lower their perceived value over time. Respect grows when a man can disagree without escalating or conceding prematurely. This balance signals self-respect. Women also observe how quickly a man seeks resolution. Rushing to fix conflict often comes from anxiety, not care. High-value men allow space when needed. They don't force emotional closure before understanding is reached. This patience communicates confidence in the relationship and in themselves. Another overlooked factor is emotional recovery. After conflict, does the man ruminate, withdraw, or become cold? Or does he return to baseline calmly? The ability to re-regulate quickly suggests emotional resilience. Women feel safer with men who do not carry tension forward as punishment or withdrawal of affection. Importantly, women are sensitive to power dynamics during disagreement. Men who use silence, guilt, or intensity to regain control create emotional instability. Men who remain steady, respectful, and clear maintain attraction even during difficult conversations. Value is preserved when conflict does not threaten connection. This is also where many men misunderstand leadership. Leadership in conflict is not about dominance. It's about containment, creating an emotional environment where tension can exist without chaos. Women are drawn to men who can hold space for discomfort without becoming it. Over time, repeated conflict handled well builds trust. Attraction becomes rooted in reliability rather than chemistry alone. Women stop bracing for emotional fallout. They relax, and relaxed attraction is deeper than excited attraction. When conflict is handled poorly, value erodes quietly, not through dramatic exits, but through emotional disengagement. A woman stops bringing concerns, stops expressing needs, stops investing. The relationship may continue, but attraction thins. Beyond emotional behavior, women also perceive a man's value through his sense of direction. This is not about status symbols or grand achievements. It's about orientation, where his life is heading, and whether he is actively steering it or simply reacting to circumstances. Direction creates gravity, and gravity shapes attraction over time. Women pay close attention to whether a man has a rhythm to his life. Not rigid routines, but intentional structure. Does he wake with purpose? Does he manage responsibilities without constant complaint? Does he follow through on what he says he'll do? These everyday behaviors communicate reliability more clearly than ambition statements ever could. A man's relationship to work and goals is especially revealing. Women are less concerned with how impressive his career sounds and more concerned with how he engages with it. A man who takes responsibility, seeks growth, and handles setbacks without bitterness signals resilience. A man who feels stuck but blames the world signals stagnation. Emotional posture matters more than circumstance. Purpose also influences how a man shows up emotionally. Men with direction are less likely to seek validation through relationships. They don't need constant reassurance because their identity is anchored elsewhere. This reduces pressure on the woman and increases perceived value. Attraction strengthens when a relationship feels like an addition, not a rescue mission. Women also observe how flexible a man is within his direction. Rigidity signals fragility. Men who cannot adapt feel unsafe emotionally. High-value men hold their path firmly but adjust tactically. They respond to change without losing their center. This balance of structure and adaptability feels mature and dependable. Another subtle factor is how a man talks about the future. Not in promises, but in clarity. Does he have a vision, even a simple one? Or does he avoid forward-looking conversations entirely? Avoidance suggests uncertainty about self. Clarity suggests self-knowledge. Women are drawn to men who know where they're going, even if the path is still evolving. Importantly, women also notice how a man integrates pleasure and discipline. Men who work relentlessly but neglect joy often feel emotionally unavailable. Men who chase pleasure without responsibility feel unstable. Value is perceived when a man balances enjoyment with commitment, rest with effort. This balance signals internal harmony. A man's environment also communicates value. Not wealth, but order, cleanliness, maintenance, care. These are external reflections of internal structure. Women intuitively read environments as emotional cues. Chaos suggests overwhelm. Care suggests self-respect. Over time, purpose becomes less about attraction and more about trust. A woman may feel chemistry with many men. She trusts fewer. Trust grows when a man's direction remains consistent under stress. When his values guide decisions rather than impulse. When purpose is absent or performative, attraction fades. When purpose is lived quietly and consistently, attraction deepens without effort. Women feel that life with this man would have continuity, not chaos. When everything is stripped down, women perceive a man's value through how it feels to be in his emotional presence over time. Not excitement, not promises, not intensity, but stability without dullness, clarity without control, strength without performance. These qualities are not learned as techniques. They emerge when a man is internally aligned. A high-value man does not try to convince a woman of his worth. He does not manage attraction. He does not monitor reactions. He allows interest to rise or fall without attaching his identity to the outcome. This detachment is not coldness. It is emotional sovereignty. And emotional sovereignty is felt immediately. Women sense when a man is centered in himself. His tone stays even. His behavior stays consistent. His affection does not spike to compensate for insecurity, and it does not disappear to regain leverage. This consistency removes emotional noise, and when noise disappears, perception becomes clear. At this stage, value is no longer something being evaluated, it becomes something experienced. Conversations feel easier. Silence feels comfortable. Decisions feel clean. A woman may not consciously say, "This man has value," but she feels calmer around him, more grounded, more herself. And those feelings shape attraction far more powerfully than logic ever could. This is also where many men misunderstand the final shift. Women do not perceive value because a man is flawless. They perceive value because he is regulated, because he does not punish honesty, because he does not collapse under pressure, because he does not stay where he is disrespected. His life continues to move forward with or without validation. When alignment ends, a high-value man leaves without drama. No speeches, no ultimatums, no emotional debts. He exits cleanly, and paradoxically, that clean exit often leaves the strongest impression of all. Not because of loss, but because of dignity. Over time, women associate value with emotional outcomes. How did being with this man feel? Did it feel chaotic or clear? Draining or grounding? Confusing or steady? These emotional imprints last far longer than attraction spikes or romantic gestures. They shape memory, and memory shapes desire. The deeper truth is this: women do not perceive a man's value by how much he wants them. They perceive it by how well he stands on his own. A man who does not abandon himself becomes someone others do not want to lose, not out of fear, but out of respect. Value, then, is not earned through effort. It is revealed through restraint, through boundaries, through emotional self-leadership, through the willingness to walk away from what does not align without resentment or bitterness. When a man lives this way, attraction stops being something he seeks. It becomes something that naturally forms around him. If this perspective helped you see attraction and value more clearly, support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more grounded psychological insights, and sharing it with someone who's still trying to understand why effort alone never seems to be enough.